The port city of Ostia woke each morning to the sound of the sea, waves crashing against wooden docks, sailors shouting orders in a dozen languages, merchants hawking goods fresh off ships that had sailed from the edges of the known world. It was a city of constant motion, of trade and transaction, where everyone was either coming from somewhere or going to somewhere else. No one stayed still in Ostia, no one except the boy. Callista first noticed him on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the autumn rains had finally stopped. She'd been working at the Trident's Rest Tavern since she was 14, 6 years now of carrying bowls of stew and mugs of wine to sailors whose hands were rough and whose manners were rougher. It was honest work, if exhausting, and the tavern's owner, old Marcus, was fair enough. The boy was standing across the street when she opened the shutters that morning, thin as a reed, maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing clothes that had once been fine, but were now little more than rags. His dark hair hung in his eyes, and he held himself with a stillness that was unnatural for a child. What struck Callista most were his eyes. Even from a distance she could see they were unusual, too bright, too aware, catching the morning light in a way that made them seem almost to glow. "Orphan," Marcus grunted when she mentioned the boy. "City's full of them. Don't encourage him, girl. We're not a charity." But Callista couldn't help watching the child throughout the day. He never approached the tavern, never begged, never even moved from his spot across the street. He just stood there, silent and still, watching the flow of people with an intensity that seemed to peer into their very souls. When the lunch crowd arrived, dock workers and off-duty soldiers looking for cheap wine, Callista found herself scraping extra portions into bowls, making servings larger than needed. By the time she cleared tables, she had decent leftovers. The boy was still there when she stepped outside with the scraps. "Hey," she called softly, approaching slowly. "Are you hungry?" The boy didn't answer, but his eyes tracked her movement with the wariness of a wild animal. Callista set the bowl down on the ground between them, along with a wooden spoon. "It's just stew," she said. "Lamb and barley. Nothing fancy, but it's warm." Still no response. The boy stared at her with those unsettling bright eyes, and for a moment Callista wondered if he could even speak. But then slowly he looked down at the bowl, then back up at her, and something in his expression shifted. Surprise, perhaps, or gratitude too profound for words. Callista smiled and stepped back. "I have to get back to work, but if you're still hungry tomorrow, I'll leave more." She returned to the tavern, and when she glanced back an hour later, the boy was gone. The bowl sat exactly where she'd left it, licked clean, with the spoon placed neatly beside it, and resting in the center of the bowl was a single white feather. The next morning, the boy was back in the same spot. Callista brought out breakfast scraps, bread soaked in bacon grease, half an apple, a chunk of cheese. Again, she set the bowl down. Again, she returned to work, and again, when she checked later, the bowl was empty save for another white feather. This pattern continued for days, then weeks. Each morning, the boy would be waiting across the street, silent as a ghost. Callista would bring food, sometimes scraps, sometimes meals she'd deliberately over-prepared, and each time the bowl would return empty with a single white feather. "You're wasting food on that creature," Marcus complained when he caught her preparing an extra-large pot of stew. "I've told you before. I'm using my own wages to buy the extra ingredients," Callista interrupted calmly. "It's not costing you anything," Marcus grumbled but didn't forbid her. Beneath his gruff exterior, the old man had a softer heart than he liked to admit. The other tavern girls noticed too. Livia, who'd worked at the Trident's Rest longer than anyone, pulled Callista aside one evening. "That boy you're feeding," she said quietly. "You know there's something wrong with him, don't you? The way his eyes catch the light, the way animals shy away from him on the street." "He's just a child," Callista replied. "A hungry child." "Maybe," Livia said, though her tone suggested she didn't believe it. "But be careful, girl. Not everything that looks like a child is one." Callista dismissed the warning as superstition, but that night she found herself thinking about the feathers, white as fresh snow, perfectly formed, appearing like clockwork. Where did they come from? The weeks passed into months. Autumn gave way to winter, and the rains returned. The boy appeared even in the worst weather, standing in downpours that sent everyone else scurrying for shelter, his thin clothes plastered to his frame. Callista brought him warmer food, thick soups, hot bread, meat when she could afford it. She also brought him a blanket once, though the next day she found it folded neatly and left by the tavern door. The boy had taken the food but refused the comfort. Proud thing, isn't he? Marcus observed. Won't accept charity beyond what he needs to survive. There's honor in that. I wish he'd at least take shelter when it rains, Callista said. He'll catch his death standing out there. Maybe he can't, Livia muttered darkly. Maybe whatever he is doesn't feel the cold the way we do. But Callista had seen the boy shivering, had seen him wrap his thin arms around himself for warmth. Whatever he was, he felt the cold. It was on a particularly brutal morning in late winter, the kind where frost painted the windows and breath came out in clouds, that Callista made a decision. Instead of leaving the food outside, she approached the boy directly. Come inside, she said gently. Just for a moment. You can eat by the fire, warm up properly. The boy's bright eyes widened, and for the first time she saw real fear there. He took a step back, shaking his head violently. It's all right, Callista said quickly. You don't have to. I just thought, but the boy was already retreating, backing away with that same unnatural stillness, those two bright eyes never leaving her face. Within moments, he'd disappeared around a corner. Callista felt an unexpected sting of rejection. She'd been feeding this child for months now, had thought they'd developed some kind of trust, but the moment she'd tried to bring him closer, he'd fled. She left the bowl in the usual spot that morning, but with a heavy heart. The boy didn't return that day, or the next, or the day after that. For a week, Callista put out food, and for a week it sat untouched except by stray cats. The white feathers stopped appearing. It was as if the boy had never existed. See, Livia said. I told you there was something unnatural about him. He wasn't an illusion, Callista insisted. He was real. He was hungry. On the 8th day of the boy's absence, Callista almost didn't put out the bowl, but habit and hope won out, and she set it in the usual place, filled with her best stew. That night, when she went to collect the bowl, she found it empty, and in it, instead of one white feather, there were 3. The boy was back the next morning, standing in his usual spot, but something had changed. He looked thinner, and there was a new wariness in his posture. When Callista brought out his food, he flinched as she approached. I'm sorry, Callista said softly, setting the bowl down and stepping back quickly. I'm sorry I scared you. I won't try to make you come inside again, I promise. The boy watched her for a long moment, those unsettling bright eyes searching her face. Finally, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. Relief flooded through Callista. Whatever fragile connection they'd built hadn't been completely severed. That would have to be enough. But as Callista turned to go back inside, she saw something that made her freeze. For just a moment, so brief she might have imagined it, the boy's shadow on the cobblestones seemed wrong. It wasn't the shadow of a small child standing still. It was the shadow of something with wings. Callista blinked, and the shadow was normal again, exactly matching the boy's thin frame. But her heart was racing, Livia's warnings echoing in her mind. Inside the tavern, Callista went about her work with mechanical efficiency, her mind churning. What had she seen? What was the boy really? That night, as she added the 3 white feathers to the growing collection she kept hidden in her room, Callista made a vow. Whatever the boy was, whatever secrets he carried, she would keep feeding him, would keep showing him that somewhere in this hard city, there was at least one person who cared whether he lived or died. She had no way of knowing that this simple act of kindness had already drawn the attention of forces far more powerful and far more dangerous than she could imagine, or that in 3 days' time, everything would change. It happened on a morning that started like any other. Callista was setting out the breakfast tables when she heard it, or rather, felt it. A sudden silence that fell over the Trident's rest like a heavy blanket, smothering the usual morning chatter of sailors and dock workers. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Laughter died in throats. She looked up from the table she was wiping and saw him. A man stood in the doorway, so tall he had to duck slightly to enter. He wore a travel-stained cloak with the hood drawn up, obscuring most of his face in shadow. But what she could see made her breath catch. A strong jaw marked by a long scar that ran from his left ear down to his neck, and his hands, emerging from the fabric as he lowered the hood, bore calluses that spoke of a life lived violently. But it was his eyes that made every person in the tavern take an unconscious step back. They glowed faintly gold, like a wolf's eyes catching lamplight in the dark. Not human eyes, not entirely. My son, the man said, and his voice was soft but carried through the silent room like a blade drawn from its sheath, has been eating here. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered with absolute certainty. And the way he said "my son" carried weight. Protection. Fierce, uncompromising protection. Callista's hand tightened on the rag she was holding. She could feel every eye in the tavern turning to her, could sense Marcus frozen behind the bar. Callista started, then stopped. Before she could find words, movement at the door drew her attention. The boy appeared, slipping past the tall man with the ease of shadow. He looked exactly as he always did, thin, ragged, silent, but now she could see the resemblance clearly. The same golden eyes, the same mark on their hands, a pale scar in the shape of a crescent moon on the back of their right palms. The boy ran to the man and pressed against his side, and the stranger's hand came down to rest on the child's head with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his fearsome appearance. "Papa," the boy whispered, the first word Callista had ever heard him speak. "I know, little wolf," the man replied, his tone softening. "You did well. You survived." The stranger's gold eyes found Callista across the room. "You," he said quietly, "you're the one who fed him when the world would not." It still wasn't a question, but Callista nodded. The man studied her for a long moment. "Thank you," he said finally, and the two simple words seemed to carry enormous weight. "You showed him kindness. You asked for nothing in return. Such mercy is rare." Marcus found his voice first. "Sir, I don't want any trouble here. If you've come to cause problems, I've come to retrieve my son." The man interrupted calmly, though there was steel beneath the calm, "and to thank the woman who kept him alive." "What kind of father leaves a child to starve on the streets?" Livia asked from the kitchen doorway, her voice sharp. The stranger's expression darkened. "The kind who had no choice. The kind who was being hunted by those who would use a child as leverage." He stopped, jaw tightening. "I did what I had to do to keep him safe." "Even if that meant keeping him at a distance." Callista found her voice. "The feathers. He left white feathers every time I fed him. What are you?" The question hung in the air. Every patron in the tavern was listening now. The stranger's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "You've heard the stories, I'm sure. The Wolf of Rome, the Emperor's weapon. The cursed warrior who changes form under the full moon." Gasps rippled through the tavern. Someone dropped a cup, and it shattered on the floor. "You're him," Marcus breathed. "The one who defied the Emperor's order 5 years ago. They said you'd been executed." "They said many things," the man, the wolf, replied. "Most of them were lies. I defied an order, yes. I refused to slaughter a village of innocents. The Emperor wanted to make an example of me, but..." His hand rested on his son's head. "I had more important things to protect." "So you ran," Livia said. "You became an outlaw, and you left your son to fend for himself." "I drew attention away from him," the wolf replied. "Led the Emperor's hunters across half the empire while my son learned to survive in a city where no one knew his face. It was the only way to keep him safe." He looked at Callista. Until someone saw past his strangeness and chose compassion. "Do you understand what your kindness means?" Callista shook her head. "You gave him hope," the wolf said quietly. "You showed him that not everyone in this world is cruel or indifferent. You gave him something I could never give him while we were separated, the belief that humanity is worth protecting." "I just gave him food," Callista said weakly. "You gave him dignity," the wolf disagreed. "You never forced him to beg. You never made him feel lesser. That is a gift beyond measure." He stepped forward. "Tell me what you want. You showed my son mercy when the world showed him none. That creates a debt. Name your price. Gold, protection, whatever you desire. If it's within my power, I'll give it." Callista looked at the boy. "I don't want anything," she said finally, "except for him to be safe, for him to have a real home, for him to be able to be a child." The wolf's expression shifted. "You ask for nothing for yourself," he said slowly. "Only for him." "Of course," Callista said. "He's a child. He deserves..." The rest of her words were cut off by a commotion at the door. 6 men in the armor of the Imperial Guard burst into the tavern, swords drawn. "There!" the lead guard shouted, pointing at the wolf. "The outlaw! Seize him!" The wolf's hand moved to his cloak, and Callista saw a flash of steel, but he didn't draw it. Instead, he pushed his son behind him, his body a shield. "Leave the woman out of this," the wolf said. "She's innocent. She knew nothing of who we are." "She harbored a fugitive," the lead guard countered. "That makes her a traitor. The Emperor's orders are clear. Anyone who aids you is to be arrested." "She didn't aid me," the wolf growled. "She fed a hungry child. That's not a crime." It is when the child belongs to an enemy of the state, the guard replied. He looked at Callista. I'm sorry, girl, but you're coming with us. No, Callista said, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. I'm not going anywhere, and neither is that child. You don't have a choice. That's when the wolf moved. It was faster than anything Callista had ever seen. One moment standing still, the next he was between her and the guards, his sword drawn. You will not touch her, he said, and his voice had changed, becoming deeper, rougher, more animal than human. You will not touch my son. The guards hesitated, weighing their orders against the danger before them. Stand down, or I'll have the entire garrison here, the lead guard threatened. Then you'd better send for them quickly, the wolf replied. Because I'm done running, done allowing corrupt men to dictate who deserves mercy. He looked back at Callista. I'm going to give you a choice. You can walk away from this, claim you were duped. The Emperor will likely believe you. You'll be safe. Or, Callista asked, or you can stand with us when Rome comes to burn everything down. The wolf said quietly, if you stay, your life as you know it ends. But if you stay, I swear on my son's life that I will protect you with everything I am. It was an impossible choice. Safety or danger. The comfortable predictability of her life or the terrifying unknown. Callista thought about the boy's eyes watching her from across the street, thought about the trust it must have taken for him to accept her food, and she made her choice. I stay, Callista said. The wolf's expression transformed. Surprise, respect, gratitude, all flickering across his face. Then we stand together, he said. And as the Imperial Guards advanced, weapons raised, Callista realized that her simple act of feeding a hungry child had just started a war. The wolf moved like water flowing downhill, inevitable, unstoppable, following the path of least resistance until resistance became necessary, and then crashing through it with overwhelming force. The first guard didn't even see the strike coming. One moment he was advancing with his gladius raised, the next he was on the floor, disarmed, his weapon spinning across the tavern's wooden planks. The wolf hadn't drawn blood, but the message was clear. He could have. Stop! The lead guard commanded, but his voice carried uncertainty now. You're only making this worse for yourself. Worse? The wolf's laugh was bitter. 5 years ago, I refused to burn a village full of families because an emperor wanted to send a message. For that, I was declared an enemy of Rome, my name stripped from the legion's records, my existence erased. Tell me, soldier, how exactly does this get worse? He moved again, and 2 more guards found themselves disarmed and on the ground. The wolf's sword remained clean, his strikes precise, disabling, not killing, but the restraint only made him more terrifying, because everyone in the tavern understood that this was mercy, that he could end every life in the room if he chose to. Father, don't, the boy said softly, his small voice cutting through the tension. Please, not here. The wolf froze mid-strike, his blade inches from the 4th guard's throat. For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the wolf lowered his weapon and stepped back. My son asks for mercy, he said to the guards. So I give it. Leave now. Tell your commanders that the wolf of Rome has returned to Ostia, and he will not run anymore. Tell them that if they want me, they can come themselves instead of sending children to do their work. The lead guard's face flushed red with anger and humiliation, but he was smart enough not to press his luck. This isn't over, he spat. The garrison will return, and next time, we'll bring enough men to take you down. I'll be waiting, the wolf replied calmly. The guards retreated, dragging their disarmed companions with them. The moment they were gone, Marcus slammed the tavern door shut and threw the bolt. Are you insane? The old man demanded, rounding on Callista. Do you have any idea what you've just done? The Imperial Guard will be back with 100 soldiers. They'll burn this place to the ground. Then we'd better prepare, the wolf said before Callista could respond. He sheathed his sword and turned to face the dozen or so patrons who remained in the tavern, all of them frozen in various stages of shock. I suggest those of you with no stomach for what's coming leave now. But know this, if you run to the guards, if you tell them anything that puts this woman or my son in danger, I will find you, and I will not be merciful a second time. The threat hung in the air. Several patrons scrambled for the door immediately, but a handful remained. Rough-looking dock workers and sailors who'd seen their share of fights and weren't easily intimidated. I'm staying, one of them said, a grizzled man with arms like tree trunks. Name's Quintus. Used to serve in the 9th Legion before I lost this. He held up his left hand, which was missing 2 fingers. Never liked the way the emperors use good soldiers as executioners. If you're making a stand against that, I'll stand with you. Same, another man added. Felix. I was at the Battle of the Rubicon. Saw too many good men die following orders that made no sense. About time someone said enough. One by one, the remaining patrons declared themselves. Not all of them, but enough to matter. Enough that Callista realized with a mixture of terror and awe that this wasn't just about her anymore. The wolf's return, his defiance, his refusal to keep hiding, it had struck a chord with people who'd been nursing their own grievances against imperial authority. This is madness, Marcus muttered, but even as he said it, he was moving behind the bar to retrieve a heavy club he kept for rowdy customers. Complete madness. We'll all be crucified for treason. Better to die standing than live kneeling, Quintus replied with a shrug. The wolf had been watching this exchange in silence, his expression unreadable. Now he moved to the center of the room, his son still pressed against his side. I didn't come here to start a rebellion, he said quietly. I came here to thank a woman who showed my son kindness. But if you're willing to stand with me, I won't turn you away. Know this, though. The Emperor's response will be brutal. He can't afford to let this defiance stand. Not when the legions are already restless. Not when half the provinces are on the verge of revolt. He'll make an example of us. Let him try, Quintus growled. He'll succeed, the wolf corrected bluntly. We're not an army. We're a handful of civilians and one cursed soldier in a wooden tavern. We can't win. Not against Rome. Then why fight? Livia asked from where she'd been standing by the kitchen door, her face pale but her voice steady. Because some things are worth dying for, the wolf replied. He looked at Callista. Because this woman chose to see my son as a child worthy of compassion rather than a monster to be feared. Because if we don't stand against cruelty and injustice, we become complicit in it. He paused, then added more softly, and because I'm tired. Tired of running. Tired of watching my son grow up in shadows. Tired of pretending that avoiding conflict is the same as finding peace. Callista finally found her voice. What are you? She'd asked the question before, but this time it carried different weight. This time she wasn't asking about rumors or legends. She was asking the man who stood before her, who had disarmed 6 trained soldiers without shedding blood, whose eyes glowed gold in the tavern's dim light. The wolf looked at his son, then back at her. You want the truth? The whole truth? Callista nodded. I was a soldier. The wolf began. A good one. Rose through the ranks quickly, earned commendations, followed orders. Until 5 years ago, when those orders became unconscionable. The emperor wanted to crush a rebellion in Gaul, wanted to show that Rome's reach was absolute. So he ordered my cohort to burn a village, not a military target, just a farming settlement that had provided food to the rebels. His hand tightened on his son's shoulder. There were children there, families, old people who couldn't hurt anyone even if they wanted to, and I was supposed to kill them all. So you refused, Callista said. I refused, the wolf confirmed, and my men backed me. 30 soldiers, all of us willing to face court-martial rather than commit mass murder. The emperor's response was creative. Instead of executing us publicly, which might have turned us into martyrs, he had his priests place a curse on us. Transformation under the full moon, wolf shape, driven by instinct, unable to control ourselves. A curse, Marcus breathed. I thought those were just stories. They're real, the wolf said, as real as the scars on my face. Most of my men didn't survive the first transformation. The change is violent, painful, and many simply couldn't endure it. Others lost themselves completely, became the beasts the curse wanted them to be. I'm one of the few who learned to hold on to enough humanity to remember who I am when the moon wanes. He looked down at his son, and he was born with the curse already in his blood. My wife died bringing him into the world, and I've spent every day since trying to figure out how to give him a life worth living. The boy finally spoke, his voice still quiet but growing stronger. Papa hid me here, said Ostia was far enough from Rome that no one would recognize us, that I could learn to be normal while he led the hunters away. But you're not normal, Livia said, not unkindly. The feathers, the way you move. What are you when the moon is full? The boy looked at Callista before answering, as if seeking permission or reassurance. She gave him an encouraging nod. I turn into a white bird, the boy said. Not a wolf like Papa. Mama said, before she died, she told Papa that maybe my curse would be different, lighter, She said maybe I could fly instead of hunt. That's why the feathers, Callista murmured, understanding flooding through her. You were leaving part of yourself behind, showing me what you really are. The boy nodded. I wanted you to know, but I was scared you'd be afraid if you saw me change. I'm not afraid, Callista said, and realized she meant it. You're still just a child who deserves food and safety, and someone who cares whether you're all right. The wolf's expression softened. You keep surprising me, Tavern maid. Most people, once they learn what we are, react with horror or disgust. But you, she sees people, not monsters, Quintus interrupted. That's a rare gift these days. A distant sound cut through the conversation, horns blowing, the regimented march of many feet on cobblestones. The garrison was mobilizing. They're coming, Felix said, moving to the window. And they're not taking chances this time. I count at least 50 soldiers, maybe more. The wolf moved to join him, his expression grim as he assessed the approaching force. They'll surround the building first, cut off any escape routes. Then they'll offer terms, surrender or die. And if we surrender, Marcus asked. We die anyway, the wolf said flatly, just more slowly and with more pain. The Emperor doesn't forgive. He only punishes. He turned to face the gathered group. Last chance. Anyone who wants to leave, go now. I won't think less of you. This isn't your fight. No one moved. All right then, the wolf said, and for the first time since entering the tavern, he smiled. A fierce, feral expression that showed too many teeth. Let's show Rome what happens when you corner a wolf. Callista watched as the men began to prepare, barricading doors, gathering makeshift weapons, positioning themselves at windows. The wolf moved among them, offering tactical advice with the ease of someone who'd commanded soldiers in actual battle. And his son stayed close to Callista, his small hand finding hers, his golden eyes watching his father with a mixture of fear and pride. Will we be okay? The boy whispered. Callista wanted to lie, to offer false comfort, but something about those ancient knowing eyes made her tell the truth instead. I don't know, she said quietly, but we'll face it together, all of us. The boy squeezed her hand. Thank you, for the food, for everything. You're welcome, Callista replied. Outside, the sound of marching feet grew louder. The battle for the Trident's Rest, and for the soul of Rome itself, was about to begin. The soldiers surrounded the Trident's Rest like a noose tightening around a neck. Callista watched from the second-floor window as they took up positions. 50, maybe 60 men in full armor, shields locked, spears raised. They moved with the precision of a well-trained unit, cutting off every street, every alley, every possible escape route. At the center of the formation stood a man in a centurion's crimson cloak. Even from a distance, Callista could see the cold calculation in his eyes as he surveyed the tavern like a general assessing a fortress. That's Marius Decimus, the wolf said from beside her, his voice carrying an edge she hadn't heard before. He was my commanding officer once. Good soldier. Terrible human being. He'll give us a chance to surrender? Callista asked hopefully. He'll give us a chance to die with dignity instead of screaming, the wolf corrected. To Marius, that's mercy. Below, Marius raised his hand. The soldiers stopped their advance and held position. Then his voice rang out, amplified somehow, carrying clearly through the morning air. Marcus Lucian Corvus, known as the Wolf of Rome, you are surrounded and outnumbered. Come out peacefully and I promise you a quick execution. Resist, and everyone in that building dies slowly. The wolf, Marcus, Callista corrected herself, leaned out the window just far enough to be seen. Marius, still following orders that make you hate yourself, I see. The centurion's jaw tightened. I do my duty, Wolf, something you forgot how to do. I remember exactly what duty means, Marcus called back. It means protecting the innocent, not slaughtering them for political convenience. It means standing for something beyond blind obedience. Pretty words from a cursed traitor, Marius replied. You had one job, follow orders. Instead, you betrayed your legion, your emperor, and Rome itself, and now you hide in a tavern with civilians, using them as shields. I'm not using anyone, Marcus said, his voice dropping dangerously low. These people chose to stand with me, something you wouldn't understand, since everyone who serves under you does so from fear, not loyalty. Callista saw Marius's hand clench into a fist. He'd always been proud, she realized, and Marcus knew exactly how to wound that pride. Last warning, Wolf, Marius said. Come out now, alone, and I'll let the others live. You have my word as a Roman officer. Marcus laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Your word means nothing, Marius. You swore an oath to protect Rome's citizens, and you've broken it every time you followed an order to harm innocents. Why would I trust anything you say now? Because you don't have a choice. There's always a choice, Marcus replied. That's what you never understood. That's what the Emperor doesn't want soldiers to understand. But there is always a choice. He pulled back from the window and turned to face the people gathered in the tavern. Callista saw the boy clutching his father's cloak, saw Quintus gripping his dock hook like a weapon, saw Livia holding a kitchen knife with white-knuckled intensity. They're going to attack, Marcus said calmly. Probably try to burn us out first. Smoke us into the open. When that doesn't work fast enough, they'll storm the building. We can't fight them all, but we can make them pay for every inch of ground. Is there no way out? Felix asked. No escape? There's always the sewers, Marcus said. Old Roman construction, big enough for people to move through. But they'll have those covered too. And the smell? He grimaced. Trust me, you don't want to know. So we're trapped, Livia said flatly. We're cornered, Marcus corrected. There's a difference. Cornered animals fight harder, and Rome doesn't know what I'm capable of anymore. His golden eyes caught the morning light, and for a moment Callista saw something shift in his expression, something inhuman rising to the surface. Papa, no, the boy said suddenly, tugging at his father's cloak. You promised you wouldn't lose yourself. Marcus's expression softened instantly. He knelt to his son's level, his hands gentle on the child's shoulders. I know what I promised, little wolf, and I'll keep that promise. But sometimes, to protect the people we love, we have to become what we fear. But if you change now, the boy's voice broke. The sun's still up. It'll hurt more, and you might not come back this time. I'll come back, Marcus said firmly. I always come back to you. He stood and looked at Callista. I need you to promise me something. What? Callista asked, though she already knew what he was going to say.
If I don't survive this, if the change takes too much, if I lose myself completely, you take my son and run. The sewers, the docks, anywhere. Get him away from Rome, away from the Empire. Take him somewhere he can grow up without being hunted. I can't, Callista started. Promise me, Marcus insisted, his voice carrying the weight of a command honed through years of military service. You're the only person who's shown him kindness in 5 years. You're the only one I trust to keep him safe. Callista looked at the boy, at his golden eyes so much like his father's, and felt something shift in her chest. She'd fed him for months without knowing who he was, without expecting anything in return, and somehow, without meaning to, she'd become responsible for him. I promise, she said quietly. Marcus nodded, then reached up to unfasten his cloak. Beneath it, his body was marked with scars, old wounds that told stories of battles fought and survived. But there were other marks too, strange symbols that seemed to shimmer in the light, marks that Callista instinctively knew were connected to his curse. Everyone away from the windows, Marcus ordered. And Callista, keep him safe. No matter what you see, no matter what happens, you keep him safe. Outside, Marius's patience had clearly run out. Fire arrows, he commanded. Callista saw the soldiers knocking arrows wrapped in oil-soaked cloth, saw them light the arrows from torches, saw them raise their bows toward the tavern. Now! Marius shouted. The first volley hit like a storm of falling stars. Arrows punched through shutters embedded in wooden walls, started small fires wherever they landed. Marcus moved faster than seemed possible, batting arrows aside with his bare hands, stamping out flames before they could spread. But there were too many arrows, too many fires. Within moments, smoke began filling the tavern, thick and choking. The stairs! Quintus shouted. The whole back wall is burning. Marcus turned to Callista one last time. Remember your promise, he said. Then he closed his eyes and something terrible began to happen. The transformation wasn't like Callista had imagined from the stories. There was no dramatic shifting of bones, no Hollywood-style morphing. Instead, it was brutal and fast, his body seeming to tear itself apart and remake itself in seconds. Fur sprouted along his arms and face, his jaw extended, teeth lengthening into fangs. His hands became claws, and his eyes blazed with golden fire. Where Marcus had stood, a massive wolf now crouched, easily the size of a small horse. Its fur was dark as midnight, its eyes still recognizably Marcus's, but wild with barely contained rage. Papa, the boy whispered, reaching toward the wolf. The creature's gaze snapped to the child, and for a moment, Callista feared the worst.
But then the wolf lowered its head, a gesture so gentle and human that it brought tears to her eyes. It was still Marcus, still the father who loved his son more than anything. Then the wolf turned toward the barricaded door, let out a howl that shook the tavern's foundations, and launched itself forward. The door exploded outward in a shower of splinters. The wolf burst into the street, and Callista heard screams, not of citizens, but of trained soldiers suddenly facing something out of their worst nightmares. "We need to move," Felix said urgently, grabbing Callista's arm. "While he's keeping them busy, we use the sewers. Come on." "But Marcus," Callista started, "is buying us time," Quintus interrupted. "Don't waste his sacrifice by staying here to burn." The boy pulled free from Callista's grasp and ran to the window. Below, his father was a whirlwind of fur and fury, tearing through the Roman formation like a storm through wheat. Soldiers scattered, their discipline breaking under the onslaught of something they couldn't fight with conventional tactics. "He's magnificent," the boy breathed. And he was. Terrifying, yes. Monstrous, certainly, but also magnificent. A creature of pure power, fighting not for glory or conquest, but to protect the ones he loved. Marius was shouting orders, trying to rally his men, but the wolf was too fast, too strong, too driven by desperate paternal instinct. Each time the soldiers formed a line, Marcus broke it. Each time they tried to surround him, he was already somewhere else. But Callista could see the cost, could see the blood matting the wolf's fur, not all of it from soldiers, could see the slight hitch in its movement that suggested injury, could see the way its attacks were becoming less precise, more wild. "We're losing him," the boy said quietly. "He's losing himself to the beast." "Then we need to bring him back," Callista replied, making a decision that terrified her. "Stay here, all of you. Take the sewers and get to safety. I'm going to get Marcus." "Are you insane?" Livia demanded. "He's a monster right now. He'll tear you apart." "He's a father," Callista corrected, "and fathers come back for their children. Watch." Before anyone could stop her, Callista grabbed the boy's hand and ran for the stairs. The street was chaos incarnate. Callista burst through what remained of the tavern's door, pulling the boy behind her, and immediately understood why trained Roman soldiers were fleeing in terror. The wolf, Marcus, was a force of nature given flesh and fury. He moved through the formation like a living blade, each strike precise despite the bestial form, each movement calculated even as blood dripped from his jaws. But Callista could see what the soldiers couldn't. She could see the hesitation in his attacks, the way he avoided killing blows when he could, the human intelligence still flickering behind those golden eyes. "Marcus," she shouted over the chaos. "Marcus, your son needs you." The wolf's massive head snapped toward her voice. For a heartbeat, she saw recognition in those eyes. Then a spear slammed into his shoulder, and the beast roared with pain and rage, the human slipping away under wounded animal fury. "No," the boy whispered beside her, his small hand tightening in hers. "He's losing himself." Marius had managed to rally about 20 soldiers into a defensive formation. They'd formed a shield wall, spears bristling outward, slowly advancing on the wounded wolf. "Pin it down," Marius commanded. "The Emperor wants it alive if possible." The wolf snarled, crouching low, preparing to launch itself at the shield wall. It would be suicide. Even Marcus's supernatural strength couldn't break through that many men. He'd impale himself on a dozen spears. "Marcus Lucian Corvus," Callista shouted using his full name, putting every ounce of command into her voice. "Your son is here. Look at him. Look at what you're fighting for." She pulled the boy forward. The child didn't resist, didn't show fear. Instead, he stepped toward his father with his hands outstretched. "Papa," the boy said, his voice carrying clearly, "come back, please. I need you to come back." The wolf froze mid-lunge, its attention locked on the child. Callista could see the war raging inside it, beast versus man, instinct versus love. "You promised you'd always come back to me," the boy continued, taking another step forward. "You promised, Papa, and you never break your promises." Marius saw the opportunity. Now, while it's distracted, 3 soldiers broke from the formation, spears raised, charging toward the frozen wolf. The boy threw himself forward, placing his small body between the charging soldiers and his father. "No!" Callista screamed. The wolf moved. Faster than thought, it scooped the child up in jaws that could crush bone, gentle as a mother cat carrying a kitten, and leaped backward. The soldiers' charge carried them into empty space, off balance, and the wolf didn't strike. It stood there, The boy carefully held in its mouth and simply watched them with eyes that were suddenly, unmistakably human again. Marcus had clawed his way back from the edge, had found his humanity in the desperate need to protect his child. Slowly, the wolf lowered the boy to the ground. The child immediately threw his arms around the wolf's massive neck. "I knew you'd come back," the boy whispered. The wolf made a sound, not quite a growl, not quite a whimper, but something that carried unmistakable emotion. Relief. Love. Marius was shouting new orders, preparing for another assault. But before they could act, something unexpected happened. People began emerging from buildings all along the street, not soldiers. Common citizens of Ostia, dock workers, merchants, the poor and forgotten. They didn't carry weapons. They simply stood there, dozens of them, creating a living wall between the wolf and Marius's soldiers. "Stand aside," Marius commanded. "This is official imperial business." "Then arrest us all," Quintus's voice rang out as he stepped forward. "Because we're not moving. This creature is a threat to Rome. That creature just fought half your unit and could have killed any of you," an old woman called out. "But he didn't. Even as a beast, he showed more mercy than you lot ever have." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered citizens. They had been watching from their windows, had seen Marcus's restraint, had witnessed the moment he chose his son over his rage. Callista stepped forward, still holding the boy's hand, moving to stand between the wolf and the soldiers. "I am Callista of Ostia," she said, her voice carrying more confidence than she felt. "For months I've fed this child without knowing who he was. I fed him because he was hungry and I had food. That's all." She looked at Marius. "You say his father is a monster, but I've seen monsters, Centurion. I've seen them in the tavern every day. Men who beat their wives, soldiers who terrorize shopkeepers. And I've seen this man show more restraint and honor in his fury than most humans show in their clarity." "Pretty speech," Marius said, "but it doesn't change the law." "The curse makes him dangerous," Callista interrupted, "but his love makes him human. The real threat to Rome isn't cursed soldiers who refuse to murder innocents. It's the system that condemns them for it." The wolf rumbled, not a growl, but something that almost sounded like agreement. "Tell them," the boy said suddenly. "Tell them what happened to Papa. Tell them why he was really cursed." Callista looked at Marius. "Do you know? Do you really know why Marcus Corvus was condemned? He disobeyed orders. His mission," Callista said, her voice heavy with disgust, "was to burn a village full of civilians, women, children, elders, and Marcus refused. He and 30 good soldiers chose honor over obedience." "And they were punished for it," Marius said. "Or were they punished for reminding the emperor that soldiers are human beings with consciences?" Callista challenged. "If you were given that same order, to murder children, would you follow it?" Marius's jaw worked, but he didn't answer. "The emperor," a new voice spoke from behind the crowd, "is not here to give orders." Everyone turned. A man emerged from the press of citizens, tall and dignified despite his simple robes. Senator Gaius Livius, one of the few imperial officials in Ostia with a reputation for fairness. "Senator," Marius said warily. "Orders that are 5 years old," Gaius said calmly. "Orders issued by an emperor who is now dead. Emperor Hadrian passed 3 months ago. His successor has been reviewing many questionable decisions." He pulled a sealed scroll from his robes. "As of 2 weeks ago, all curses issued for refusal of orders to harm civilians have been formally suspended pending review. The new emperor believes soldiers should not be punished for maintaining their humanity." He handed the scroll to Marius, who read it with increasing disbelief. "An imperial pardon," Marius breathed. "Conditional, but real." "The curse remains," Gaius explained. "But Marcus Corvus is no longer a fugitive. He and his son are granted imperial protection, provided they pose no threat to citizens." The wolf made a sound that might have been a laugh. It was absurd, being pardoned while still transformed. But it was real. The boy looked up at his father. "Papa, does this mean—" The wolf lowered its head, touching its nose gently to the boy's forehead. Then, with visible effort, the transformation began to reverse. Within minutes, Marcus stood in his human form again, bleeding from wounds but unmistakably human. He swayed, and Callista rushed forward to support him. The boy grabbed his father's other side. "It's over?" Marcus asked, his voice hoarse. "The running is over," Gaius confirmed. Marcus looked at Callista. "You saved us, not just today, but from the moment you first fed my son." "I just gave him food," Callista replied. No, Marcus said, his golden eyes holding hers. You gave him humanity. You gave me a reason to keep fighting to hold on to mine. You gave us both something I thought we'd lost forever. What's that? A home, Marcus said simply, and someone who cares whether we live or die. The boy pressed closer to both of them, and Callista felt something settle in her chest, a sense that this strange connection was meant to be. Come on, she said gently. Let's get you both inside. You need rest, food, and medical attention. Marcus smiled, a genuine smile. Yes, ma'am. And as they limped back toward the damaged but still standing tavern, the boy between them, Callista realized she'd found what she'd been searching for her whole life. A family. Strange, cursed, impossible, but hers. 5 years passed. The Trident's Rest had been rebuilt. Not as it was, but better. The fire damage from that chaotic morning had been extensive, but instead of simply repairing, they'd reconstructed. The new building was larger, sturdier, built with white stone that caught the morning light and seemed to glow. A sanctuary. Callista stood in the doorway, watching the morning crowd. But the crowd was different now. Yes, there were sailors and dock workers, but there were also families with children, elderly citizens who came for free meals, veterans who gathered to share stories, and no one paid taxes here. That had been Marcus's doing. After the pardon, he'd purchased the Trident's Rest and declared it neutral ground, a place where imperial authority ended at the threshold. The emperor's tax collectors had objected. They'd sent officials to argue, then soldiers to intimidate, but each time they'd been met by Marcus himself, standing in the doorway with his golden eyes catching the light, and they'd left. Word spread quickly. The tavern where the Wolf of Rome lived, where anyone could find food and shelter regardless of their ability to pay. It became a symbol of the idea that there were still places in the empire where human decency mattered more than imperial decree. "Mama!" Callista turned to see the boy, though he wasn't really a boy anymore. At 12 years old, he was tall for his age, with his father's build beginning to show. His golden eyes were bright with excitement as he bounded down the stairs, a white feather clutched in his hand. "Look, it's perfect." "Beautiful," Callista agreed, smiling. "This one's for you," he said, pressing it into her hand. "For your collection. You always said mine were payment, but they're really gifts." Callista felt her throat tighten. 5 years, and the boy, her son, because that's what he'd become, still remembered those early days, because he did transform still. The curse hadn't been lifted, only suspended. Every full moon, father and son both changed. Marcus into his wolf form, and the boy into a magnificent white bird, a kind of eagle. They'd fly together through the night, and Callista would watch from the window, marveling at the beauty of something that was supposed to be a curse. "Thank you," she said, tucking the feather into her apron pocket. "Of course you will," the boy said. "You treasure everything. Papa says that's your gift. You see value where others see nothing. Your father is too generous," Callista replied. "He's right, though," a deeper voice said from the kitchen doorway. Marcus emerged, wiping his hands on a towel, flour dusting his arms. He'd been baking bread. "You do see value in everything, including a cursed soldier and his son when the rest of the world saw only monsters." He crossed to her and did what he did every morning, pressed a kiss to her forehead, gentle and reverent. They'd married 2 years ago, not in a grand ceremony, but in a quiet moment with Senator Gaius officiating and their small community as witnesses. Callista had become Callista Corvus, and the boy had gained a complete family. "The bread smells wonderful," Callista said, leaning into Marcus's warmth, "though I'm still amazed that the Wolf of Rome has become a baker." "A former weapon of the Empire," Marcus corrected with a slight smile. "Current baker and occasionally overprotective father." "But good?" Callista asked, because sometimes she still worried. "Better than good," Marcus replied, his golden eyes soft. "I spent 30 years as a soldier, 5 years running, and the last 5 years learning what it means to actually live. I've never been happier." The morning crowd began to thicken. Regulars called out greetings, and Callista moved to serve them. She wasn't just a tavern maid serving strangers anymore. She was part of something larger, a community that had formed around the idea that kindness mattered. Quintus was there, as he was most mornings, sitting at his usual table with Felix and other veterans. They'd become permanent fixtures, old soldiers who'd found in Marcus a kindred spirit. "Wolf!" Quintus called out. "We're still on for tonight, yeah? Full moon training?" Marcus nodded. "Wouldn't miss it, though if you try to wrestle me in wolf form again, you're going to regret it." That's what makes it fun. It had become a tradition. On full moon nights, when Marcus and his son transformed, a handful of the bravest souls would join them in the hills outside Ostia, teaching the boy control, helping Marcus maintain his humanity even in beast form. As Callista served breakfast, hot bread, fresh cheese, the stew that had started everything, she found herself thinking about how much had changed, how a simple act of feeding a hungry child had spiraled into this. A rebuilt tavern, a family, a community. "Mama, can I help serve?" the boy asked. "Of course," Callista said, handing him a tray. She watched him weave through the crowd with practiced ease. He was confident now, unafraid, his golden eyes no longer a mark of something to hide but simply part of who he was. "You're crying," Marcus observed quietly. "Happy tears," Callista assured him. "I'm just grateful for all of this. For you, for him." Marcus pulled her close. "You saved us," he murmured, "and we saved you right back. That's how love works. It's reciprocal. It builds on itself." A commotion at the door drew their attention. A young woman entered, clearly exhausted, with two small children clinging to her skirts. Her clothes were threadbare, her face gaunt. "I'm sorry," she said hesitantly. "I heard this place feeds people, even if they can't pay." "That's right," Callista said immediately. "Come in, sit down. We'll get you and your children fed." As she guided the woman to a table, as she brought out food and watched the children's eyes widen at the sight of fresh bread, Callista felt Marcus's gaze on her, turned to see him watching with an expression of profound love. This was their legacy, not just the rebuilt tavern or the community, but this, the continuation of that first choice to show mercy, to see need and respond to it. That night, under the full moon, Callista stood on the hill outside Ostia and watched Marcus transform. It was still brutal, still painful to witness, but he was faster now, more controlled, and when the massive wolf stood before her, golden eyes gleaming, she felt no fear, only love. Beside him, their son transformed as well. The boy's change was more graceful, bones reshaping, arms becoming wings, until a magnificent white eagle stood where a child had been. Father and son looked at each other, then both turned to Callista. The wolf lowered its head in the gesture she'd come to know. The eagle mantled its wings, both of them, in their own way, saying thank you. "Go on," Callista said softly. "Fly, hunt, be what you are. I'll be here when you come back." And she would be, just as she'd been there every morning with a bowl of food, just as she'd been there when soldiers came, just as she'd been there through transformation and pardon and rebuilding, because that was what love did. It showed up, it stayed, it endured. The wolf howled, not rage or pain, but something that sounded like joy. The eagle took flight, circling once overhead before winging toward the distant mountains, and then both creatures were running, flying, racing across the moonlit landscape with the freedom of beings who were finally home. Callista watched until they disappeared. Then she turned back toward Ostia, toward the white stone tavern that glowed in the darkness like a beacon. They'd started with a boy, a bowl, and a feather. They'd built a family, a sanctuary, and a legacy. And every morning, when Callista opened the tavern doors, she knew that somewhere, someone was watching, someone who needed help, someone who needed to know that kindness still existed, and she would be there, bowl in hand, ready to feed, to shelter, to show that mercy was never wasted. That was the legacy of the wolf, and it would endure long after they were gone.